Relax and listen to the voice. In the year 2045, scientists made a breakthrough in the field of organ transplants. Before then, all transplants of animal origin to humans had failed miserably. Scientists had tried transplanting the hearts of pigs into human beings, but the organs were not compatible. However, one medical team decided to use a different process during a trial operation and had an unexpected success. The first trial operation was performed on a 60-year-old man who was suffering from cancer. He was thin and withered, almost skeletal, and could no longer digest food. Doctors told him that he had less than a month to live. At this, the man volunteered for the daring new procedure because his days were numbered and he felt that he had nothing to lose. Surgeons removed almost all of his internal organs and replaced them with those of a pig. The operation wound up being a resounding success. Within a week, the man was eating several meals a day. Within 2 weeks, he had returned to his normal weight. In fact, the patient's recovery went so well that he was released from the hospital and allowed to return home. Doctors then arranged to visit him once a week to monitor his progress. However, upon their first visit, the doctors were shocked by what they found. His kitchen was completely empty and the cupboards were bare. The man had sold his fridge and his oven. When they questioned him about this, the patient finally admitted that he had grown tired of normal food. Instead, he went out at night and ate from garbage cans. He said that he liked nothing better than to root through the rubbish and gorge himself on the putrid meat, rotten fruit, moldy cheese, and decomposing vegetables that he would find. The doctors conducted a series of tests upon their odd patient and were surprised to find that he was in extremely good health. In fact, he was stronger and fitter than he had ever been in his life. Because of the extraordinary success of this procedure, it was decided that all cancer patients would be treated using a full pig-to-human organ transplant. This led to a revolution in healthcare. People no longer had to die from cancer. Instead, they thrived with the new pig organs functioning within their bodies. Politicians began to wonder if the new organ transplant procedures could be used on healthy humans as well. The poorer people in society often couldn't afford to buy food. If all of the poor people in the country had their internal organs replaced by pig organs, they could dine on garbage for free. Malnutrition would be a thing of the past. In due course, poor people were given the operation. Pretty soon, it proved so popular that it caught on among young people too. Everyone wanted to jump on the bandwagon, and as time went on, thousands of people had their internal organs transplanted by those of pigs. People were no longer ashamed of eating garbage. Restaurants had to close down due to lack of customers. A dietary revolution was sweeping through society. Garbage became valuable, and people began selling it for higher prices. Soon, garbage became a delicacy that only the rich could afford. Poor people had to resort to eating grass and could often be seen on their hands and knees in public parks and fields, grazing contentedly. However, nobody seemed to notice that the number of stray cats and dogs in the cities began to drop drastically. It was soon after that old people began vanishing without a trace. Mothers who had turned away momentarily were finding their baby carriages empty. It didn't take a rocket scientist to work out what was happening. The organ transplant patients had become cannibals. The government reacted swiftly. In a matter of days, the army was called in to deal with the grisly problem. They arrested anyone who had received the organ transplant. The patients were rounded up and sent to camps on the outskirts of the cities. No provisions were made for food in any of the camps. The story was the same in every camp. First, the patients resorted to eating their own clothes. Then, the weak, sick, and infirmed gradually disappeared. Then the rest of the women, followed by the men. All of them were killed and eaten by the stronger patients. It was survival of the fittest. By the end of the month, there was only one patient left in the camp. After murdering and devouring all of his fellow prisoners, he went for 7 days without a morsel of food. He begged the guards to give him something to eat, but they refused. They were under strict orders not to feed the patients. Only days later, the patient began eating his own toes. Desperate and screaming with hunger, he chowed down on his legs. Not much longer after that, he sliced off his own ears and nose and gobbled them down as the guards watched in horror. After 30 hours of incessant screaming and crying, he choked to death while trying to consume his own arms. Pig-to-human organ transplants were never performed again, and the procedure has since been outlawed. Penny is an overworked housewife who is finding it hard to cope. She has 4 young children. 2 of her children, Janet and Susan, are always fighting with each other. Gertie is very clumsy and always seems to break things, and Russell is always playing pranks on someone. Penny's husband, sadly, is not much help. In fact, he's little more than a kid himself. One morning, while Penny cooks breakfast, Janet and Susan are there, shouting and fighting with each other, while Gertie is spilling milk all over the place, and as she turns her back to clean this up, Russell throws a rubber snake into her frying pan. At this point, the smoke alarm is going off, the phone begins to ring, the dog is barking, and in the distance, the washing machine is loudly bumping and rattling. Penny can't stand all the noise and feels that it's driving her crazy. She feels like she's living in a nightmare. One day, while Penny takes a small break from being in charge of running her family, she gets to do something that she loves. She goes outside and begins to weed and tend to her garden. While digging in the ground, she unearths something that is buried in her flower bed. As she digs it out, she sees that it's a small wooden box. Upon opening the box, Penny finds that inside there is a beautiful gold pendant. The design on the front of the pendant reminds Penny of a sundial. She likes this pendant so much that she decides to wear it around her neck. The next day we can see Penny shopping at the grocery store. Her children are there, whining and pestering her, and the other customers inside of the store are also getting on her nerves. Once Penny has finished shopping and wrangled all of her children, on the way home, they begin fighting in the back of the car. Penny feels as though she's on the verge of a nervous breakdown. Once home, and while she's cooking dinner, her children begin to pester her again. At this point, her husband comes downstairs and begins complaining to her about his torn t-shirt. There is so much noise and so much going on that Penny just can't take it anymore. "Shut up, everyone!" she yells. All of a sudden, her husband and kids stop talking and stand perfectly still, as if they are frozen in time. At first, Penny is shocked and confused, and she begins to feel horrible for her outburst. As she looks at her family with sad, pleading eyes, she realizes that something is quite wrong. They really aren't moving. They're standing perfectly still. It's at this point that she realizes that this has something to do with the pendant that's hanging around her neck. The pendant seems to have the power to stop time. After thinking for a moment, Penny tells her family to begin talking again, and suddenly, time restarts. Her family picks up exactly where they left off and continue arguing as if nothing had happened. After bravely testing this a couple more times, Penny begins to understand that if she says, "Shut up," it will stop time, and if she says, "Start talking," time will restart again. However, it only works if she's wearing the amulet. A wide smile begins to spread across her mouth, and her face brightens up as she realizes the power that she has at her fingertips. The smile on Penny's face only broadens when she thinks to herself, "Maybe now I'll be able to get a little bit of peace and quiet." At the end of the night, after Penny has finished all of her chores and her children are sleeping soundly in bed, she sits herself down in her bed. She takes a deep breath and stares up at the TV. A news program begins on the television. In this, the newscaster begins relaying the story about the recent peace talks between the United States and the Soviet Union. Penny begins to get bored and changes the channel. The next day, Penny decides to make good use of her ability to stop time. She is able to enjoy a quiet and peaceful breakfast while her family are frozen. When she goes to the grocery store, she stops time again so she doesn't have to deal with the other customers and all of their rude bustling about. Later that day, her doorbell rings, and as she opens it, she's greeted by two anti-nuclear protesters and petitioners who immediately begin pleading their cause to her in an effort to get her to sign a petition. Penny politely listens for a while, but after a short time she begins to feel annoyed, and realizing that she won't be able to get rid of them quite so easily, she decides to use her amulet. She stops time, and then drags both of them out onto her lawn and leaves them lying there on the grass. When Penny goes back inside her house, she starts time again. While looking out of her window, she watches as the two campaigners regain their movement, and she chuckles at the sight of their confusion as they find themselves lying in the middle of the lawn. Confused and frightened, she watches as they scramble to their feet and run off down the street. Later that evening, Penny is able to find herself enjoying a relaxing bath when all of a sudden the sound of a siren disturbs her peace and quiet. The siren sound is very loud and annoying and startles her greatly. In fact, it sounds like an air raid siren. Just then, she hears her husband's panicked voice calling out to her. She can tell by the sound of his voice and the alarm contained within that something is very wrong. Penny jumps out of the bathtub, grabs her towel, wraps it around her body, and rushes into the bedroom, where she finds her husband, frozen in front of the television, watching a news report. "It's all over," he gasps. "It's all over." Penny turns her attention to the television and notices that there's an emergency broadcast on the screen. "We have just gotten confirmation," the newscaster says. "The first Soviet missile will reach U.S. airspace in a matter of minutes. Those of you listening should immediately go to the nearest public fallout shelter." Her husband looks up at her, embraces her, and begins to cry. Penny's 4 children all come running into the room, unsure of what they're hearing, disturbed, and frightened at what they think they have heard. Penny is once again completely overwhelmed. This is all far too much for her. "Shut up!" she screams. "Shut up!" All of a sudden, time stops. Penny quietly walks out of her house, shuts the door behind her, and begins walking down her road and through the town, still dressed in only her bathrobe. Everyone around her is frozen, and when she looks at their faces, she can see panic and horror in their eyes. They all seem to be looking up at the sky. After taking in this scene for a short amount of time, Penny glances up to see what all the people were looking at, and she is horrified to see that just above there is a Soviet nuclear missile frozen in time just a few hundred feet above her town. I live in the smoke, green smoke in the red light of the moons. I move within the smoke, floating, watching, and waiting. I've waited on this barren planet for almost 1,000 years. One day I hear voices, human voices, speaking in a human tongue. I watch, I wait, I listen. 3 humans stand near a small spacecraft. They're dressed in shiny metallic suits and wear glass helmets on their heads. One human signals to the others. They take off their helmets and they breathe in the air. The humans then spread out to explore the barren surface of the planet. One of the humans sees something that catches its interest. It sees the green smoke. It sees me. The curious human approaches. It stares at me and I stare back. I reach out and I touch it. Now I am human. I look down at myself. I wriggle my fingers. I stretch my legs. I touch my shiny metal suit. I breathe in. For the first time in 1,000 years, I taste the air. What's wrong? I hear a voice. I understand what the voice is saying. I open my mouth and I reply, "Nothing is wrong. Everything is normal." For the first time in 1,000 years, I have a body. I test it out. I blink my eyes. I nod my head. I stretch out my arms. I get down on my hands and knees and get back up again. I walk around. The other 2 humans approach me cautiously. "What are you doing?" one human asks. "What's wrong with you?" "I am normal," I say. "There is nothing to fear." I feel a trembling within myself. It grows and grows until I cannot stop myself from trembling. I feel a burning heat within. My mouth opens and I emit a piercing scream. I cannot help myself. I collapse on the ground and my body thrashes to and fro, my limbs flailing wildly. I cannot control the body anymore. I close my eyes. The screaming stops. The shivering ceases. I am floating in the green smoke once more. The dead human lies on the ground. The 2 other humans gather around it and kneel down. I reach out and touch one of them. Now I am human once more. "He's dead," says the other human. "His heart stopped." I nod my head. "What happened, Captain?" it asks. "How could he just die like this?" I stand up straight. I roll my eyes. I put a hand to the front of my head and I feel my nose, my mouth, and my face. I take in a deep breath of air and I let it out slowly. "What's wrong, Captain?" the human asks. "We must leave this planet immediately," I say. Together, we carry the dead human back to the spacecraft and then drop him. I can feel the trembling in my body once again. The shaking grows and grows, and I do not know how to control it. The burning sensation starts deep inside, and once again, I am screaming. My right hand reaches into my belt and fumbles for a weapon. I cannot stop it. It places the weapon to my head. "Sir, what are you doing?" the human cries out. "Sir, no!" Against my will, the finger pulls the trigger. There's a deafening explosion. The screaming stops, and I'm floating in the green smoke once more. The second dead human body lies on the ground below me. Where its head once was, there is now just a twisted mass of blood and bone. The one remaining human makes a run for the spacecraft. I follow him. I cannot allow him to leave. He scrambles up the ladder and gets inside, and just before he closes the doors, I reach out and touch him. I am human once more. I climb down the ladder and go for a walk. I walk, and I jump, and I dance and I sing. I skip across the planet's barren surface, performing cartwheels as I go along. This body will only last a few short minutes, but I will enjoy it while I can. Soon I will return to the green smoke, and when I do, I will wait. I will wait as long as it takes. I will wait and wait until more humans arrive. There was a kid we used to play with when we were young. His name was Simon, and he had a strange ability. He could pass through mirrors. We had no idea how he managed to do it, but for him, it was the most natural thing in the world. He would just tell us to stand aside, and then he would poke his head through a mirror and climb right through it. When he was on the other side, he would turn around and wave at us from the mirror world. Simon was able to step through any mirror just as easily as if he were walking through a doorway. It worked with any reflective surface. He could hop in and hop out. Whenever he touched something in which he could see his reflection, his fingers would go right through it. One day he sat down at the edge of a puddle and simply lowered his legs into it as if it was a bottomless pit. He told us all about what it was like to be in the mirror world, how different it was. According to Simon, everything was much the same. It was just the other way around. Left and right were flipped. He could see people's reflections as they passed by without noticing him. Apparently, if the mirror was smudged, the mirror world would be smudged as well. If the mirror was tilted at a slight angle, the mirror world would be tilted too, and he would have to slide down the floor and then run back uphill to climb out. One day, a guy named Mark invited Simon to his birthday party. Simon entertained everyone by showing off his mirror tricks. Eventually, Mark became fed up with Simon hogging all the attention on his birthday. They got into a fight and Mark chased after him, but of course, Simon simply jumped through a mirror and Mark wasn't able to get at him. We all thought that this was pretty funny, but then Simon took it too far. He turned towards Mark's reflection in the mirror world and punched him in the mouth. He hit Mark's reflection so hard that he knocked out 3 of his teeth. Mark was fine, of course, but his reflection certainly wasn't. And after that, whenever he stood in front of a mirror, he saw his battered reflection with a swollen mouth and missing teeth, and there was nothing he could do to fix it. One day, Mark decided to get his revenge. He cornered Simon down by the beach and dragged him to an old fishing pier. Mark grabbed him by his ankles and held him upside down over the clear surface of the lake. "If you ever do something like that again," Mark threatened, "I swear I will drop you into this lake. I mean it." Simon pleaded for his life and said that he was so extremely sorry. Mark wasn't actually going to hurt him. He just wanted to give Simon a scare. Unfortunately, something went wrong. Mark intended to pull Simon back up, but unfortunately, he wasn't as strong as he had thought. He had worn himself out while dangling Simon over the edge of the pier. He lost his grip and Simon fell down into the water. He let out a terrified scream as he hit the surface of the lake and disappeared. When Simon didn't come home that night, his parents called the police. They searched for days, but they couldn't find any trace of him. Then one day, an old man who had been fishing on the beach came forward and confessed to the police that he had seen the boy Mark drop some screaming kid into the lake. The police visited Mark, and after questioning him for many hours, they arrested him, and then they dredged the lake for 5 days straight, searching for Simon's corpse. There were divers that went down into the water as well, looking for the body, but they couldn't find anything. To this very day, no one has been able to find Simon. You see, the surface of the lake was like one huge mirror. Mark didn't drop Simon into the lake. He dropped him into the sky. When Marcus touched down on the planet's surface, it was daylight. Looking out the window of his space capsule, he could see the 2 suns, and there were also 7 moons orbiting in the sky. The sensors indicated that the atmosphere on the planet included oxygen, and that oxygen was breathable. Marcus put on his spacesuit, opened the airlock, and cautiously exited the capsule. He seemed to have landed in a desert area. Mountains of sand stretched as far as the eye could see, and everything was an angry shade of orange. He took off his helmet and inhaled a deep breath of air. And that's when he noticed it, the alien craft off on the horizon. Over the mountains of sand it hovered, coming closer and closer by the second. The craft landed nearby and a hatch opened. 2 figures stepped out. They walked on 2 legs, and their bodies were shaped much like those of humans. However, that's where the similarities ended. They were much taller, and their skin was a sickly shade of green. Their limbs were long and skinny, and their heads were large and bulbous. They had no ears, no noses, and tiny, thin mouths without lips. They had strange, shiny black eyes that almost seemed like mirrors. As he watched the aliens approach, Marcus was careful not to make any sudden movements. He didn't want to scare them off or frighten them into thinking that he was dangerous. When they drew near, he waved at them, attempting a friendly gesture, and extended his hands. The aliens eyed him with caution and curiosity, but kept their distance. "My name is Charles Marcus," he said. "I come from planet Earth. I come in peace." The aliens seemed to smile at him and nod their heads. They spoke to each other in a curious language of clicks and squeaks. For a brief while, Marcus tried clumsily to communicate with them. It seemed obvious that they understood him, but he couldn't understand them. They beckoned to him and gestured towards their spacecraft. It appeared that they wanted him to follow them. Marcus soon did, and as he boarded the craft, the hatch closed behind him, and they took off in flight. The aliens brought him to their city. They led him to a huge, complex building that looked important, and he followed them down the long halls and corridors until they came to a room. As soon as they stepped inside the room, he was struck by how familiar it looked. The interior of this room was almost an exact replica of a typical house on Earth. There was a table and a chair, a bed, a wardrobe, and a toilet. One wall of the room was covered by long purple curtains. One of the aliens left, and when it came back, it was holding a tray. It set the tray down on the table and gestured for Marcus to sit. He obeyed the creature, and when he lifted the lid on the tray, he was shocked to see a plate containing food. Real food. It was a dinner, just like a typical dinner he would have eaten on Earth. Marcus was highly impressed by the lengths that the aliens had gone to make him feel at home. At this point, the aliens turned and left, and he heard a click as the door locked behind them. Marcus was hungry. He picked up the knife and fork and began to eat his dinner. He then heard a low buzzing sound, and the curtains on the wall slowly drew back. Through the window, he could see hundreds, if not thousands, of aliens outside. They were all gathered there, staring at him. And that is when he noticed the bars on the windows, and the sign. There were a lot of strange alien symbols on the sign, but beneath them, printed in perfect English, were the words, "Earth creature, in its natural habitat." Bang, bang! The first time I remember it happening was when I was 9 years old. My friend Johnny and I were playing in his backyard. The sun was just setting, and it shone through his back fence, casting an orange and red glow. We were playing cowboys and Indians. Johnny was the cowboy, riding down the lonesome trail, and I was the Indian, threatening to scalp him. We were kids back then. Obviously, we now see the slippery predicament of playing the games that we once played. Still, we were children, and we ran around the swing set, laughing and whooping. Johnny accidentally tripped over his own shoelaces, and I ran over to where he lay in the dirt. Pointing my finger at him, I shouted, "Bang, bang!" Suddenly, his head exploded. Bits of brain, skull, and blood showered down onto the grass. At first, I didn't understand what had happened. I just stared at him, open-mouthed, and my hand fell to my side. In the background, I could faintly hear someone screaming his name. Johnny's mother came tearing out of the back door and knelt down, screaming, beside her son's headless body. She cradled him in her arms, sobbing and wailing as she began picking up the larger pieces of bones from his skull and bits from his head. I ran all the way home. Johnny's funeral was a closed casket affair. As they lowered him into the ground, his tearful mother grabbed me and started shaking me like a rag doll, begging me to tell her what had happened to her son. I couldn't answer. I couldn't say anything. I had no more of an idea than she did. Over the years, I gradually managed to get over it, and almost managed to forget the entire traumatic experience. I never ever played cowboys and Indians again. The second time it happened was in the park. I was sitting on a bench, eating lunch, and there was a little girl running around, playing with a water pistol. She came up to me, pointing her water gun at me, and shouted, "Hands up!" I smiled and I raised my arms, pleading and pretending to be afraid. She sprayed me in the face with her water pistol and giggled, and then she said, "Now it's your turn." Something inside of me told me not to do it, but I shrugged off the uneasy feeling. I lifted my finger and I pointed it at her. Bang, bang! The moment the words left my lips, the little girl exploded like a water balloon. Crimson chunks rained down around me. For the next few minutes, all I could think of was my friend Johnny and his decapitated body lying in the backyard. When I came back to my senses, I saw the girl's mother scrambling around on the grass, screaming and gathering up her daughter's dismembered limbs, frantically clutching an arm and a leg. All I could do, again, was run away. It's been many, many years since then, and there was a third time. It happened just this morning. I had an argument with my wife. and in the heat of the moment, I wagged my finger in her face, telling her off. I didn't even say bang bang. It happened anyway. I can't bring myself to go on anymore. I can't bear the thought of cleaning my wife's remains off of the kitchen floor. I can't take the chance that I might cause another death. I just can't do it anymore. That's why I've decided to put an end to all of this. All I have to do is place my finger against my head and say the words. Bang, bang. One Sunday morning, Lauren was awoken by the sound of her father knocking on her bedroom door. "Time to get up," he said brightly. "It's Red Button Day." She sat up and rubbed the sleep from her eyes. Red Button Day, she thought. What the heck is Red Button Day? Confused, Lauren rolled out of bed and got dressed. She stumbled into the bathroom and looked at her reflection in the mirror. She had the strangest feeling that something wasn't quite right. She began brushing her teeth and washed her face. When she went downstairs, her mother was in the kitchen, washing the dishes. She was dressed in her Sunday best. Her father sat at the table eating breakfast. He wore a suit, and her little brother was shining his shoes and brushing his hair. Lauren sat down at the kitchen table. "Dad, did I hear you right?" she asked hesitantly. "Did you just say it's Red Button Day?" "Well, of course," replied her father. "Did you forget?" Lauren frowned. Something was wrong. "What are you talking about?" she said. "We have to leave soon," said her father. "We don't want to be late." "Is that what you're wearing for Red Button Day?" asked her mother. "Am I missing something here?" asked Lauren in frustration. "What is Red Button Day?" Stop acting stupid," growled her brother. "You didn't read the pamphlet?" asked her father. "It's around here somewhere. I know it's around here somewhere." He got up from his chair and went to look for the pamphlet. "I've never heard of Red Button Day," Lauren whined, trying not to lose her temper. Nobody answered her at this point. They were all far too busy getting ready. With a sigh, Lauren picked up her cell phone and called her boyfriend, Michael. "Hey, what's wrong?" he said when he answered the phone. Nothing," replied Lauren. "Why do you ask?" I thought you told me this was your family's Red Button Day," he said. "What the heck is Button Day?" she asked. "You didn't hear about it in school?" he said, sounding surprised. "No, maybe I missed that day." "Well, it's too complicated to explain now," replied her boyfriend. "Good luck." Before she could say another word, he quickly hung up the phone. Just then, her mother came downstairs, carrying some clothes. "This is a nice blouse," she said. "Put it on. I want us looking our best for our Red Button Day." "Mom, listen to me for a minute," said Lauren. "Something seems very wrong here." "I know," replied her mother. "We're running late, and you're still not dressed." "No, that's not what I mean, Mom," Lauren said angrily. "I don't know anything about Red Button Day. I've never heard of it. Am I the only one who hasn't the faintest idea of what's going on?" Her mother stared at her for a long time, and when she finally spoke, her voice was calm. "Look, darling," she said. "I know you're upset. Just go get changed. Here's your blouse. I'll see you in the car in 5 minutes, okay?" With that, her mother walked away, leaving Lauren standing there, clutching onto her vest blouse. The next thing she knew, she was in the car. Everything was happening so fast it made her feel uneasy. She felt trapped. What in the hell is going on here, she thought. Has everyone suddenly gone nuts? Maybe this is all some kind of elaborate practical joke. After a while of driving, the car pulled up to the outside of a drab, gray government building. "We're here," her father said cheerfully. They all stepped out of the car and walked through the main entrance. Lauren followed her family, still wondering where they were going. A receptionist was sitting behind a huge desk. She looked up and smiled as they approached. "Hi, we're here for our Red Button Day," said her father. "Name, please?" "Crandall, family of 4. "Through that door, sir," said the receptionist. "Just follow the red arrows." They walked down a long, brightly lit corridor that was lined with offices until they came to a large white room. There were 4 small, waist-high pillars in the middle of the room, and each one had a red button on the top. At the other end of the room, there was a polished desk. 3 government officials in gray suits were seated behind it. The government insignia hung on a huge banner over all of it. The room was silent, eerie, and sterile. Lauren watched as each of her family members stepped up to a pillar, watching the officials expectantly, and leaving a pillar for her very own button. Trembling, she stepped up to the pillar, only to notice with a jolt that the floor around them was on a slight incline, angled towards a drain behind her that she hadn't noticed when she had first arrived. One of the officials then spoke, his voice echoing in the open space. "Members of the Kendall family," the government official began. "Crandall family," her father corrected. "Apologies, Crandall family," the official continued. "You have been chosen for the honor of Red Button Day. The dear leader thanks you for your sacrifice to your country and to your people. Your name shall join those in the long hall in your honor." "We're very proud," her father said as he put his hand on his chest. "All hail the dear leader." "All hail the dear leader," replied the government official. Her mother nodded silently, and her little brother looked as if he were about to weep with pride. The official continued, Now it is time to push your red buttons. May God be with you all." Lauren's father turned to his wife and children and smiled. "I'll go first," he said, "to show you all how easy it is." He pushed the red button on the pillar. As Lauren watched, her father's face turned a bright shade of red. A crimson teardrop slid down his cheek and plopped onto the hard white floor. Lauren watched in frozen horror as blood began to pour from her father's eyes, ears, nose, and mouth. His face began to melt. The flesh slid off the bones and splattered onto the floor. Almost instantly, his head exploded, and his lifeless body crumpled to the floor. With a strange feeling, and without knowing she was doing it, Lauren realized that she was screaming. Her mother and her brother pushed their red buttons at the exact same time. They began to melt as well. Blood seeping from their eyes and ears, trickling from their noses and mouths. Then their heads exploded, and everything was silent. "Miss Crandall," said one of the government officials, "it's time to push the red button." Lauren couldn't answer. She couldn't move. She stood there, wide-eyed and trembling with fear, staring at the red button beneath her fingertips. "Miss Crandall, Red Button Day is mandatory," the official said in a monotone voice. "You don't have a choice in the matter. Overpopulation has gotten out of control. Some of the population needs to be culled. Your family was chosen, just as many other families have been. Remember, this is an honor. Your country needs you. The dear leader needs you. Now push the red button." It happened in a small town in Florida. It happened very suddenly. One night, while the residents were sleeping safely in their beds, a gigantic sinkhole opened up in the center of town. The earth collapsed and the concrete fell away, leaving a gaping pit in the ground. The next morning, the people in the town awoke to find the enormous sinkhole. It was 100 feet wide and looked as if it was extremely deep. One brave man stood at the edge of the hole and shouted, "Hey!" But there was no echo, only silence. A young boy picked up a handful of small stones and tossed them into the hole. He waited for the sound of the stones hitting the bottom of the hole, but it never came. Later that day, a group of scientists arrived to examine the sinkhole in an attempt to find out what had caused it to appear. Despite conducting hundreds of tests over the course of multiple days, they ended up leaving, baffled, without any clear indication to the cause of the appearance of this hole. After just a small amount of time, the national media began descending on the small town, broadcasting footage of the hole on live television. The newspaper headlines declared it as a never-ending hole and the bottomless pit. A few days later, after all the fuss had died down, some people found that the sinkhole could be useful. They began to discard their garbage into the hole. A lot of the people from the town brought out their trash cans and bags of rubbish and tossed them down the open shaft. Old sofas, refrigerators, mattresses, televisions, and furniture all began to be hauled out and dumped into the bottomless pit. Some of the men in town threw in their photographs of their ex-wives and ex-girlfriends. Women began throwing in love letters from their ex-husbands and ex-boyfriends. Criminals started to use the hole to get rid of guns and knives that were probably used in robberies and crimes, so the police wouldn't be able to trace them. There was a man who, unbeknownst to his neighbors, had murdered a little girl. Under the cover of darkness, he dragged her corpse out to the sinkhole and tossed her body in. A nuclear power plant then decided to take advantage of the hole. They loaded up unmarked vans with nuclear waste, and over the course of a few days, all of that went into the sinkhole. It seemed as if everything people wanted to get rid of would be thrown down into the infinite blackness of the bottomless hole. One day, a young boy was walking by the hole when he happened to hear something coming from the depths. It sounded like a man's voice shouting, "Hey! Hey!" A moment later it began, and some small stones came flying out of the sinkhole. Well, everyone, thank you for tuning in. That's a wrap on our very first episode of Strange Sci-Fi Stories. We hope that you've enjoyed these tales of the strange and unknown. Keep your eyes and your ears open for the next installment of Strange Sci-Fi Stories. Take care of yourselves out there, and until next time, sweet dreams.